Light it up.
Welcome, everyone.
Hi, everybody.
I hope everybody had a good Thanksgiving or whatever you want to celebrate on a day to eat a lot of meat.
That's right. And that we recognize that, you know, that it's for Indigenous people, it's a day of mourning, right?
Yes.
And wanting to acknowledge the mourning that happened from the tragedy of genocide brought on by European settlers, right? Colonialism and the impacts of that, you know, and ultimately thinking about the family, right? Go ahead, May.
Then let's set the intent right now that in this moment, as we call upon our guides and goddesses from known and unknown sources, to everyone in our universe, we thank you all for joining us today in Brave Space, and that we speak to heal the wounds of the past, to create healing into the future and a new generation of growth. And today we're going to speak about many atrocities that have happened just within the hour.
Me too, I matter, you matter, we matter. Together we are love. It's gotta be all of us to stand up and speak out.
Hi, I'm Mark Sacknoff.
Greetings, family. My name is Kevin Baker.
Hi, I'm Ann May.
I'm a 65-year-old white guy. I've been married for 33 years. I was raised in the Jewish tradition, and I've been practicing Buddhism for a while, 37 years now.
I come from a diverse background. All of their DNA is rolled up in the Black Africanness of me.
I'm half Chinese and half Japanese, and maybe, just maybe, 11% Korean.
I'm a business strategist, I'm an author, and I'm also a 2-time Emmy-nominated television producer.
I am known as son, husband, father, brother, uncle, nephew, grandfather.
I'm just getting off of work right now as an intuitive advisor and spiritual coach.
See, I believe that honest dialogue is the key to solving the big problems that we're facing as a society.
My life's journey has been devoted to supporting the realization of our best selves through the embodiment of cultural responsiveness and race equity so that we can all show up as our true, authentic selves.
I think we need to address some really uncomfortable conditions and situations, and perhaps maybe upgrade our definitions of life.
I love a lively conversation. I'm willing to get uncomfortable. I'm willing to listen to others, and I'm willing to dig deep in order to seek the truth.
Welcome to this journey that we're about to take and having critical conversations about race, equity, inclusion, and other topics.
Let's do this together. I don't want to do this alone.
'Cause it is up to us.
So come join me and my great pals, Kevin and Mark.
We can change the world. Our love can change the world. We can change the world.
So,
Yes.
a quick
Absolutely.
news flash in CNN shows the dangers of shutting down the opportunities of learning what true Black history is in U.S. industrialized nation of education. It doesn't share the truth. It doesn't share what's really happening and what happened. Kevin, tell us what's going on right now in U.S. education.
Well, you know, one of the things that you just said was Black history, right? And one of the things I think that what we're really talking about is American history, right? And world history. And the fight that white people are putting up about critical, not all white people, right? That there's some white people who say we don't want critical race theory taught in our schools, right? Matter of fact, there's even one helped the Virginia governor win the election, right? By speaking on that, which is where I'm sitting now in Virginia, right? And really, critical race theory is not taught in schools. What's taught in schools, or what has been attempted to teach in schools, is true and correct American history.
Written
Right.
by true American white history men.
Right. Absolutely. 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 You know, and there's a African proverb, I may not get it exactly correct, but it says that until the lion can tell its tale, then the hunt will always glorify the hunter, right? Meaning that whoever wins tells the story.
Well, I
Right.
mean, you know, we know the old saying is history is written by the winners. And the history in this country was written by white people. And then you get to whitewash your own history and make it all seem so wonderful, like Thanksgiving, which seems like such a wonderful holiday that the white people were starving and the Native Americans brought some food. But if the Native Americans had been smart, they would have held it back, because look at the trouble it costs. I mean, white people, you know, it's like, yeah, we'll eat your food. Now we're going to kill you. And by the way, we have smallpox, which we didn't even plan on, or in later cases they did. And so, you know, this whole thing about Thanksgiving in itself is one of these things that, well, again, you know, to Kevin's point, you know, it's history's written by the winners. And then, but if the lion gets to tell its tale, then the hunter may not like it.
Absolutely, and that's what we have here, right? So we want to rearrange things. We want to call enslaved Africans employees or workers.
Oh,
Come on, you know, this again is happening in our educational system, right? The great state of Texas wanted to change that, but again, it's a move to slant our understanding of true American history, right? So the question becomes, when are we really going to deal with what happened in this country, right? And is the only way for us to accomplish what one of our goals is and why we're doing this, right, is to tell the truth about history and not whitewashing it. I mean, and you say that whitewashing, Mark, and I'm imagining white people with white paint painting it on themselves again to become even more white, right? And
and they're not put on a blacklist?
We'll see. Come on. So then we're talking
Hey.
about these definitions that we have that shape who we are, right? We were talking about the fact that in some Asian communities, we know that there's Saturday Japanese school, and you know, and you can tell me is there, you know, a Saturday Chinese school as well.
Oh yeah.
Right. And at one time prior to integration, we were doing a lot of that stuff in Black community too. And I don't want to make it seem as if we're not doing that now, but it is minimum. It is minimum that we are doing that. And my belief is that part of that is because we are not here with an intact culture, right? Our African culture, and for those who may not be aware, right, descendants of enslaved Africans who were kidnapped and brought here, your culture is African, right? And you know, that's something that has to be acknowledged, right? There was, and at the end of, here's a fact. At the end of enslavement, there were some who said, well, since y'all are African, we're gonna send y'all back to Africa. And there was some that said, great, let's do that. And there was others that says, oh no, I ain't African no more, I'm American, right? And we don't want to go back, right? So the role it comes back to, you know, identity crisis. Who are we in this world that's been created? And did some of us have to deny our African heritage to stay here? Because again, the argument is, yes, we all have, as descendants of enslaved Africans, we have helped build this country. Blood, sweat, and tears for hundreds of years, right? So why do we have to go anywhere, right?
Mhm.
I mean, what should have happened is we should have gotten the land that we were supposed to. You know, there were tons of Europeans that came here with all kinds of land grant acts that moved all across the country and got land. Yet the descendants of enslaved Africans, who we now call African Americans, didn't get any of that. Matter of fact, a lot of the land that was stolen and taken away. There are many cases about that as well. Right, and all of this, again, this is the argument against critical race theory, right? Because if we tell the truth in the schools, then America may look bad, you know? And the
But
white
our
people,
generations to come, our generations to come, our great-grandchildren, our great-great-grandchildren, our great-great-great-great-great, if they ever get to keep them here on this planet, they will never know the truth if we don't start speaking it. So
that's the idea.
they're learning that at home. I hope that somebody is helping them to receive the truth.
Yeah, and I
Well-
mean, I think that there's clear, as we've discussed this in the past on these conversations, there's a clear example about how the post-war German Republic addressed Nazism to their own people and to their own students. And especially since the Nazis made a very specific attempt to brainwash children. In fact, they used children against their own parents in the Nazi regime. And so it became really important to them not to just, sweep this under the rug or pretend that it never happened, but to teach directly about it. Granted, there weren't a whole lot of Jews to participate in that education, but at least it was, that they had shame, and it was national shame, and they accepted it. And in South Africa, they had a Truth and Reconciliation, program that was led by, Reverend Desmond Tutu, where they didn't pretend that apartheid didn't happen. Of course, it was so recent, nobody could pretend that it didn't happen. And so these things are, in my estimation, they're examples that people can come to terms, white people can come to terms with their unpleasant past, learn from it, and grow. But when you pretend that it doesn't exist, we all know that it just gets worse,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And
come on, go ahead, Mark, finish.
No, I was just going to say, and then, this whole, I have to say that, these pictures, these very disturbing, videos of white women yelling and screaming at school board meetings. By the way, my hat's off to anyone who wants to be on a school board nowadays. It's a completely thankless gig, and it doesn't pay very much or very little, even if it has any honorarium. But the thought that these women who have, if anything, as mothers, you'd think that they would have compassion for other people, other mothers whose children have been discriminated against and continue to be. And instead, they've been duped and manipulated by liars and crooks who have an agenda that they have successfully manipulated these people into buying into this bullshit. And it's really unfortunate, because now they're stooges. They're taking action on the behalf of liars and criminals, and it's crooks,
But they're working to uphold the illusion of whiteness.
Because the people who have manipulated them realize that it's in their best interest to mobilize this base of disempowered people by pretending that they will be empowered if they stand up for whiteness. Because they learn from Black people that Black people who stand up get empowered when they stand up for Blackness. And white people, poor white people and suburban white moms, don't feel empowered right now in this country. And so they're easily manipulated. And of course, some of them, if there's white moms listening to this and you don't think you're being manipulated, take a good look in the mirror, girl, because something bad's happening. You fell for it.
And you speak about that, which is, we just had an orange president, right? I mean, we've had a lot of white presidents. We've had one Black president, and we've had one orange president so far, right? And the orange president, he was, look at all of the foul things that he did and said. And white people was like, we don't care.
Right.
We still want them. We don't care. But then if somebody else does something and you want to take them down.
Yeah. And isn't that
Right.
fascinating? Which is, by the way, I mean, I think that, you know, the definition of drinking the Kool-Aid is that it alters your reality.
Absolutely.
It's a poison.
And here, even after an insurrection happened on January 6th, you know, people still want to be in denial about the orange man's influence. And it's like, come on.
Well, but I mean, again, you know, I think we have to be careful here because, as you know, not to get back into the hierarchy of bad actors, but the hierarchy of bad actors tells us that at the bottom you have dupes, people who have been manipulated. They've drunk the Kool-Aid, they've fallen for the lies, they've been manipulated. They're often well-meaning people. And above them in that hierarchy are stooges, and stooges are people who've drunk the Kool-Aid to the point where they're actually showing up at school board meetings and threatening, you know, elected officials and threatening, you know, people in protests, or showing up with a gun at a pizza place in Washington, D.C. because they think that there's some kind of conspiracy, or they're standing still in Dealey Plaza thinking John F. Kennedy Jr. is going to show up from the dead. I mean, these are stooges, right? It takes being a dupe to the level of action. That's called being a stooge. And then above that, my friend Irving says, are liars and crooks. And liars and crooks are people who know that what they're saying isn't true, but they're doing it for attention or for money. So if you're being paid to say something you know is not true, you are a liar and you're a crook. But who is telling you what to say? And that's the top level. That's where the orange man sits and so many others. And that's what my friend calls the level of dangerous assholes. And dangerous assholes are the ones pulling the strings in this country. And they're the ones trickling down all through all those people. They're the ones who support QAnon theories that they know are absurd. They're the ones who have already been vaccinated, but tell people that vaccinations are bad, you know, and they're the ones who are benefiting from stirring up people's fears and misgivings, anger, and resentment. And so if we understand that, then I think some of those people who are screaming at school board meetings can be unwound, and they can be, you know, they can be talked to. They perhaps can be reasoned with. And certainly the people who are dupes, because they're often well-meaning people who just drunk the Kool-Aid. It's when you get to the liars and the crooks and the dangerous assholes that we got a real problem.
And all of them paid into the fund to defend Kyle Rittenhouse.
Yeah. They did, because they thought he was a hero. And now that the liars and the crooks want to actually raise his stature, they want to take this kid, who, by the way, for the rest of his life will be dealing with his conscience about having killed 2 innocent people and injured a third. He'll be dealing with that in his conscience, assuming he has a conscience, which I believe.
Well, that's where I was going, assuming he has a conscience.
He'll be dealing with that for the rest of his life. In the meanwhile, now he is a political pawn. He's a pawn among the liars and the crooks and the dangerous assholes.
Right. And we have to remember that his mother drove him there.
Yeah. And his friend bought him the rifle.
Which dangerous crook made the Kool-Aid for that jury?
Yeah.
See, that becomes a question, right? So now with him being found innocent, and by the way, I believe that, you know, people should have went out and protested, you know. You know, did some people protest?
Yes.
Yeah, some people did.
Okay.
But you didn't see any white people out there protesting, you know, like white anti-war protesters, you know, so to speak.
Right. So in essence, what this verdict has done has given white people who want to go get their gun, and we know a lot of white people love their guns, right? To go out and they love their objects, to go out and defend other people's objects against the bad Black, brown, and white people that want to go out and protest injustice. You know, they're going to grab their guns and they're going to go out with guns so that they can protect other people and shoot some people because somebody's already gotten off.
Yeah.
And Mark, you had brought up that it also gives license to Black people and white people and other people who go out and protest to arm themselves to protect themselves. And what's the end result of everybody having guns out there?
It ain't going to be good.
It ain't going to be good.
No, because here's the thing, whether I'm not a gun person, I get it. But in this country, guns are legal. There are more guns in this country than there are human beings. So, and there's more ammo than there is, insects at this point. So, forget about, unwinding that's going to be very difficult. The concern that I have isn't about the guns. It's the life condition of people. If that kid, Kyle Rittenhouse, had a stick and he wanted to fight those people with a stick, they'd all still be alive. Fine, they might have been beat up, or maybe they had lost an eye or something, but they'd be alive. But the thing is, when you put gasoline on a fire, and the life condition of people is so low, so angry in many cases. And again, we're talking about white people against white people, right?
Right.
One of them was clearly emotionally disturbed. And long ago in this country, we thought we made a determination not to deal with emotionally disturbed people with violence. Although they get tased a lot, but at least not to shoot them, So I agree. I think it's a bad development on many levels. I suppose it's a little bit more encouraging that the murderers of Ahmaud Arbery were all convicted. And each was convicted on a separate series of charges, which I think was really interesting. So the jury really understood, it seems, the directions from the judge and what the charges were. But I think also we need to point out that that trial was not run on race. It was not tried on race. It was tried solely on the merits of whether this was a defensible or whether self-defense was a correct,
Defense for that.
Yeah, for that. So
crime.
So I don't know. There's some lessons in there for us and all this. I'm not sure what they all are.
Well, some questions that came up was the competency level of the prosecutor in the Kyle Rittenhouse case versus the competency of the McMichael and Bryant trial, right? And I think that I don't know if it was competency, or in cahoots, right? I don't know if because I had never heard of a jury being picked by letting the defendant stick his hand in a bag or a box and pull out numbers. Right.
Yeah, I don't know where that came from. I think I'm not a lawyer. I'm surrounded by them, but I'm not an attorney. But there's a lot of interesting and unusual stuff that the judge did and wouldn't allow the people who were killed to be called victims, So right. I think there's a lot of things that might have been questionable, but what I think is important is that, at least from observing this in the Arbery murder case, the prosecution didn't talk about it as a racial incident. They talked about it as self-defense. Was that justifiable self-defense? Even though everybody knew it was about race, because it's a young black man in a white neighborhood being chased by 3 white men. Right. So,
which was the essence of the call. The original call was because there was a black man in the wrong neighborhood. That's how it was referred to.
So I think one of the things that, going back to this discussion about schools and history and how all these things are done, is that, we don't seem to like to admit in this country that race underlies so many things in our society.
Everything.
Well, it certainly underlies education. It underlies what goes on in the criminal justice system. It underlies what we, how we hire people and what goes on in the hiring process. So, and in the military and in many other places. So,
right. And this conversation sprung off of critical race theory. And we can say that all of the ideas and the thoughts that have been passed by have been influenced by how people and what people educate themselves with, right? And we have some that have wanted to stand on the truth and get their education, and others who have stood on lies.
Yeah.
right? And this false narrative. And that false narratives then begin to set things in motion.
Well,
Right.
and I agree. And I think that there's a fear of the truth in this country. I really believe that. I mean, you could take it all the way back through American history, but I mean, certainly, Nixon knew how to play the race card. He played on the fears of white people. Reagan did, the first Bush did, the second Bush certainly did, but even Bill Clinton in some ways, with welfare and how he dealt with, certain things, despite his positive relationships in the African-American community. But I think there's not just is there a pervasive fear of race, but there's a pervasive fear of Black people on the part of white people. White people are afraid of Black people. I know, because I was. I mean, that's how I grew up. It's like, look out for those people. Of course, I was raised Jewish, so it was look out for Christians, and Black people,
And so what brings that fear, right? And I believe that, who was it, Patrick Henry or somebody that said, give me liberty or give me death, right? So I don't know if there's been any battles or wars in the world that white people have won without killing and without violence. So therefore, how can you even conceive of the fact that after what white people have done to Black people, that they don't want to be violent and do it back to white people, right? And I think that's what the fear is based on. If I'm white and I've done that to somebody, my fear is that they're going to come back and do it to me. So I have to always look out for them, right? And I mean, could white folks' fear be based on anything else other than that they're scared that Black people will do to them what happened to them? As many times as Black folks have stood up after being killed in churches and other places and says, we want to forgive them. We want change.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that we haven't had a race war in this country is pretty surprising considering what's actually gone on. But I also think that the fear that white people have for Black people is the fear of Black power, of Black people asserting their rights, asserting their natural power, their natural influence, beyond the very closed and circumscribed worlds of entertainment and sports, for example.
Well, entertainment and sports, I mean, that's not power, is it? That's, I mean, they're out there entertaining white people and some Black people.
What do you think, May? You've been awful quiet.
I think there has been a silent and deadly race war going on in the Americas forever. Forever. And it's our job as humanity to really rewrite that history now. If we can start with even educating ourselves more and more, accepting and appreciating the truth more and more, we're making room in our hearts and our spirits and our minds and our business worlds and everywhere in our financial well-being for everyone. When it says all men created equal, bullshit. I have not seen equal ever. Half Asian, half Chinese, half Japanese, maybe a little bit Korean. I don't freaking know. Anyways, I'm married to a white man, and just last week, the experience of racism is happening. I had a white woman look at me and go, "You celebrate Thanksgiving?" I didn't throw my eggs at her, but I really thought about it for just a second. But it was just cracked me up. I said, well, I'm kind of living in the Americas, so I can eat a little turkey. I had nothing. I had nothing for her. I was just shocked. Oh, you celebrate Thanksgiving. This is called education. This is called understanding that we live in a homogenous, beautiful Americas right now. And I think our opportunity to know the truth, to know what our brothers and sisters have been through, to know the Black truth is a very important step to understanding what our real tax dollars should be doing in education.
Well, you talk about tax dollars and education, right? So that's also built on the slant because schools are based on the economic strength of each neighborhood. So if you live in a poor neighborhood, your school doesn't get very much money. If you live in a rich neighborhood, your school gets a whole bunch of money. Not only do you get more money based on your taxes, but then because of the wealth in the neighborhood and the families, they're able to come out of pocket and provide even more.
Well, and wait,
Right.
if you have money, then you can determine what is being taught.
See, here we
You can have
there we go.
art, you can have art, you can have music, but you also suddenly feel empowered that you should be able to decide what the curriculum is. And in fact, if I recall in one of these elections, recent, gubernatorial elections, that one of the candidates said, well, parents shouldn't be messing around with what's being taught in school. That is exactly not what parents want to hear. That is the opposite message. Parents want to believe that they should have a real influence on what's being taught in school. And, to a large extent, I agree. At the same time, we have to ask ourselves, what do we think is true? And why do we believe that it is true? I think a lot of people in this country, especially after the George Floyd murder, began to ask themselves those questions. And I think that a certain part of the country not only didn't want to ask those questions, but realized that there's so much fear around even thinking about those questions that they start denying even those who want to bring those questions up. And that's where you end up with a lot of people who are easily duped because they're afraid. They don't want to question their reality. They're having a rough enough time just getting through the day. Why do they want to ask if their ancestors might have been slaveholders? Why do they want to find out if they might have a little black blood in their history that might maybe make them a little bit more compassionate to people of another color? Because their lives are on a freaking, rough go as it is. They're on a precipice every day looking over the edge. So
And
of
they
course
don't
it's
want
easy.
to blow up the illusion.
No, because that illusion might be the only thing keeping them going. Otherwise, they'll end up at Dealey Plaza waiting for John Kennedy Jr. to show up. Or
That guy's from Federal Way, Washington.
I know, can you believe it? Or they, people have a Q tattoo. That's my favorite. Really, you're going to live with that? You're making a statement there. Okay, good for you. What other letters of the alphabet are you going to go for now? It's kind of mind-boggling to me. But denial is so, so big in this country. It is, we all have I don't claim in any way to be, completely free of denial or delusion. That's what the whole purpose of, as a Buddhist, the whole purpose that the Buddha said is to remove the veils of delusion that are preventing us from seeing the truth of our own lives and the lives of others. But what he really meant was seeing that each person is fundamentally a Buddha, or each person possesses this absolutely intrinsic value of enlightenment as an enlightened being. And so when we go around denying other people's history or whitewashing or, being duped or becoming stooges, we're absolutely just going in the opposite direction and bringing other people with us.
One of the things that I tell people and groups and organizations that I work with is doing this work around whiteness and understanding white normative behaviors and how we need to change that. It's really like going through a grieving process, right? And some of it is the grieving the loss of power and privilege. And the very first stage of grief is denial. And then there are at least 5, some say 7, 5 to 7 stages of grief, right? And so with denial being the first one, there's generally 4 other stages that you have to go through, right? And here we're stuck at denial, right? The next is anger, which some of that anger brings out people like Kyle Rittenhouse, right? And then we get to bargaining, right, where we have the liberal white people that want to bargain and say, oh, I'm good. I understand that there's an issue. So therefore, because I understand racism exists and I'm not participating in it anymore. No, you are, right? Because we're all swimming in these same waters, right? So then after we get to that realization, then there's depression. Oh my God, I can't believe this. I thought I was such a good person. And oh my God, I'm still participating in these systems to harm people. And what am I going to do? And all of that stuff, right? And then of course, we can go back to some of these other stages, right? All of that before we even get to acceptance.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If you even get to acceptance.
If you even get to acceptance.
Believe me, I think we're a long way from acceptance in this country, but that doesn't mean I'm not hopeful that they're, the mere fact that the three of us are having this conversation gives me hope that, maybe somebody watching this will ask themselves, well, why am I afraid of Black people? Or why do I think Asian people might not be celebrating Thanksgiving when they grew up in the San Fernando Valley? Why do I believe what I believe? If I can ask myself that question, like, oh yeah, how do I know that to be true?
And here's the thing, not only do white people need to ask themselves that, but all of us do. Black people, Indigenous people, Asian people, Pacific Islands, Latinx people, all of us have to ask ourselves, why do we believe what we believe? If we grew up in the San Fernando Valley or we went to any school in America, because the schools in America teach white supremacy, right? All of the schools with their curriculum teach Asian people, teach Black people, teach Indigenous people, teach Latinx people to be better white people.
Yeah, which is crazy.
It absolutely is.
What's funny? I'm a better white person now. Oh.
And that's a realization too, because when we look at people of color who are in positions of power in this country and in organizations and all around, we have to ask, what has been the cost? What cost have you paid to be where you are? And is that something then that you may be willing to give up? Our brother Randall Robinson said that oftentimes he keeps talking about Black people. I'm going to substitute that and say people of color come to do well. I'm sorry, let me back up. He said that I'm substituting people of color for Black people. Oftentimes people of color come to do good, but they stay to do well. So when I'm in the school system and I'm making $150,000, $230,000, $300,000 a year, and I'm a person of color, do I really want to change the system that may impact my financial health? Oftentimes not. So then we have people of color in these systems that we say are upholding white supremacy and white normative behaviors, and they don't change it because it is paying them well.
Well, it takes courage. It takes courage to ask yourself what I believe and why do I believe it's true. And I think it takes courage to stand up and try and change a system that, to get out of our comfort zone. I know that those white suburban moms thinks it takes courage to go down to the school board and scream at them. That's different. That's just
privilege and power.
That's just, yeah. And it's just raw anger.
What about the courage of micro advocacy? Even taking small steps to do something to say, wait, maybe there's more information that we need to know. Maybe there's another truth. Maybe there's a greater story. And maybe we can stop this illusion, this white illusion.
Yeah, and I like to call it, we talked about microaggression to microadvocacy, but I really like to talk about it being microaggression to microactivism, because microactivism leads to macroactivism. And I agree with Kevin that, if you look at the people in history who have stood up for human rights, it's always at great cost. The higher you stand up, the greater the cost is going to be. And, I think about not just Dr. King and so on, but I think about, again, because I was raised Jewish, when I think about Oskar Schindler in Nazi Germany or Raoul Wallenberg, Schindler lived and survived, but Raoul Wallenberg was taken prisoner by the Soviets and may have spent 20 years in a gulag for saving thousands of Jews, and for whatever reason was never released. And so, and Chiune Sugihara, the Japanese consul, in Europe, who wrote all these transfer visas, and that's why a bunch of Jews ended up in Shanghai of all places,
That's
right?
where
Like,
there's a huge population of Jewish people.
I know, it's crazy, so when one person stands up, when they're willing to do it, amazing things can happen. I really think that that's absolutely true. And I think I've mentioned that, as a Buddhist, my Buddhist mentor, Dr. Ikeda, said that, the great change or human revolution, bloodless spiritual change in a single person can change the destiny of an entire nation and all of humanity. So I think that micro advocacy moving to micro activism is a step. Those are two steps, and that next step could be the kind of advocacy where a person can really ask another person honestly, do you hear what you're saying? Do you really believe what you're saying? Whether that's in Congress, or whether that's in a school board meeting, or whether it's over dinner, or whether it's that wacky uncle of yours who, it's like, do you really hear what you're saying? Is that really what you believe? Do you really believe that Bill Gates has put a chip in the vaccine? Because if he has, why isn't my Outlook working better? It's like, what the fuck?
Well, I use mine. To connect to Google and Alexa, because sometimes I'm a little far away from Alexa, so I'll just tap and say,
Tap that chip.
Alexa, play such and such.
I know.
Google,
I just say,
find such and such.
Yeah, I say, Bill, can you hear me? Or Jeff Bezos, are you up in space? Can you hear me? Can you get my package? All right. On that note,
We're coming into the holidays, and I hope that everyone takes a moment to make something amazing happen. If we can start a conversation at the dinner table or wherever you might work, whatever you do, if we can open our hearts to humanity in a greater way, I can tell you it's juicy and it feels really good. Asking questions, even if I celebrate Thanksgiving, I think in a strange way, I saw her innocence as well as I saw her blindly asking. And I didn't punch her in the throat. Okay, I did not. But I want to actually congratulate her for actually coming out of maybe a discomfort zone and said, I need to know. Okay, I don't think any question is stupid. I think it's important to ask. Be kind, of course, be compassionate and considerate, but ask. So take this time during this holiday as we come up to be of service, to show compassion, to open your hearts. Gentlemen, it's always fun being with you, and it's great to have these conversations. Let's keep this going and welcome everyone again to Brave Space, and we hope to see you soon.
Absolutely. Thank you all.
thank you and
See
happy
y'all
holidays.
next time.
Yep.
Whatever holiday you celebrate, however you celebrate it, whether that's the holiday or whether you just decide to go and eat and be with family while they're doing their thing, enjoy yourself, enjoy life. Ashe, ashe, ashe.
Thank you.